All right. Good morning, everybody. We're so excited that you're here to talk about Reservoir Farms, to meet two wonderful local grower partners and corporate partners. So I wanted to say thank you to them for being here today. They are insanely busy, and they both carry like nine phones. They're those sorts of people, they're like important people like that who carry lots of phones. They all have side businesses and, they're just families and all these things they're juggling. So we just really appreciate them here. I'll introduce them quickly and then we'll hear from them. Josh Ruiz leads innovation at Duda. He's also become a great friend and local and is just one of the growers in Salinas Valley that really is known for keeping it real and being very direct, very grounded. So, Josh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We also have Ben Pallone, who is part of the innovation team and specifically the senior director for automation at Western Growers. And Ben was one of and is one of the closest advisors to the Reservoir project and has been before it had a name. And when it was just an idea in an Excel document, and Ben was really with us every step of the journey and is one of my absolute go-to people for all sorts of matters and one of my favorite debaters. And and so Ben, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thanks for having me.
So here's a little bit of our agenda. I just did the speaker introduction. We also have three folks from the Reservoir team. We have Pat and Gonzalo, who support all the startups and residents that are thinking about Reservoir Farms, whether that's today or in the future. And they really are designed to be consultants versus sales. I was talking to an entrepreneur yesterday who's hasn't raised any money yet, and he's kind of saying, "Oh, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure about that, but I've been, Gonzalo's been supporting me and helping me think through it." And so that's a lot of what Pat and Gonzalo do, and they're great at it. They're very consultative, and they really help companies at different steps of the journey think about California market entry. So thanks, Pat and Gonzalo, for everything you do. And Pat is off camera right now, but Pat got married on Saturday, so congratulations, Pat. Excited for you. Haven't seen the picture yet, and Pat was back at work on Monday, so that tells you a little bit about Pat Flynn. He is all work ethic. And then we also have Grace Wadecki, who is our senior marketing manager. Grace does all of the brand language for the Reservoir, does all of our content, does our website, does our signage, and all those different things. I was talking to someone the other day, and they said if Steinbeck were to be re-illustrated, they would have Reservoir do the art, and that is Grace. I thought that was a great line. Very, very sweet. So today we're going to talk about Reservoir Farms, and we're going to talk a little about the concept, where it came from, and then we absolutely will have some time for Q&A at the end. We're also, of course, going to hear from our speakers. These are a couple of really fun pictures. You can see here a sort of a vintage deer tractor that looks like a character from the Cars movie. I love those eyes. And then also, of course, Salinas. And that picture on the left is actually a picture of lettuce at Reservoir Farms. That's the real place. That's the real thing. And on the right, of course, is a modified Amiga that is now part of the Bonsai Robotics product family. So where this comes from for us, we think about specialty crops or high value crops and really the critical challenges and imperatives facing this critical industry. Um, Specialty crops are fruits, vegetables, nuts, flowers as well, and they are the fresh stuff, the good stuff, the stuff that has all of the nutrients that we eat. And this industry is really facing challenges and facing some headwinds. And if you look at some of the numbers that kind of cover up our state, there are crops like the asparagus that are almost kind of a extinct endangered species. It's like the bald eagle at this point. Good luck finding California asparagus. It's only a $14 million crop. And it's really kind of disappeared in one generation. Um, Another one I'll point to is the garlic. We grow 99% plus of the United States garlic in California, and we're losing garlic acreage. And of course, we're not putting this out there to be dramatic. We're putting this out there because these are the kinds of metrics that really inspire us to think about the role that technology will now play. And there have been many times, kind of in history, where an industry looked quite difficult or quite impossible, but then it was really technology and the rapid development of technology that sort of created more sustainability. And a lot of those are natural resource industries in particular. And if we look at this stat and the kinds of technologies that we're expecting to really arrive in the next decade or so, it's because there is so much opportunity for mechanization, automation, and really physical AI to play a role in how we farm. And what's fun about the speakers we have today is that they've been involved in that journey from the outset. So someone like Josh is actually, building his own machines and really taken kind of that, aspect of their farming and done it hands-on. Been part of Carbon Robotics and FarmWise, and now part of WGA. When we learned about ag tech and sort of how ag tech is built, the reservoir found that there are a lot of gaps in the kinds of support that a startup can get. And that was really the kind of the secondary inspiration for Reservoir Farms. The first was looking at the challenges facing specialty crop ag in the global north. A lot of those are labor related, a lot of those are regulation related. And then seeing that technology was really needed to step up and play a role. And then if we think about then sort of the next step or the next thing is how do we support the entrepreneurs, the founders, the roboticists, the technicians, the machinists? How do we support them to build the solutions that we need? And that's where we saw a bunch of gaps as well. So if you think about an early stage startup, a roboticist, someone who comes right out of school and wants to build a machine for farming, they have to get access to a farm to test. They have to find professional growers to get actual feedback from, so they're solving the right problems. They have to get access to a shop so they can modify and fab aspects of their machine, maybe to fit that grower's conditions, maybe to fit a new farming environment. And they also have to hire. They have to connect with other startups because really ag tech is a team sport. You can't build everything yourself. And a lot of these things just don't exist off the shelf. It's very different than being in San Francisco, for example, where there's 100 different startup accelerators that you can plug into, and you kind of get your pick of the litter. If you're solving a challenge that's a rural one or an open air one, these sorts of resources just don't exist. And we boiled it down to this stat, which is that there are over 7,000 startup incubators around the world. There are over 20 in Berkeley alone, for example. But none of them combine two simple things: a professionally farmed specialty crop farm from professional growers and a deep tech R&D space. Those two things. So a space where a roboticist can get access to a shop, get access to the machines they need, and get access to a farm that they don't have to farm themselves. And that's what led us to building Reservoir Farms. So the process basically is that you sign up, and that's what Pat and Gonzalo are here to kind of help you address. And certainly it'll be easy to get in touch with us if you'd like more information. You come in, and on day one, you get access to a shop and farm space. You get access to a professionally farmed farm. If you're building, let's say, an electric weeder, and you need access to 1 acre of romaine lettuce, we can make that happen immediately when you get there. And then the moment you're there, you get access to a shop. But I think maybe even more importantly is you get to meet people like Ben and Josh because they're in the community. And so much of what Reservoir Farms actually is just a community experience and making it easier to plug into a place like Salinas Valley or the Central Valley in the future or wine country in the future, which are places that are not necessarily that easy to just say plug in, not that easy just to meet people and establish credibility. And so a lot of what we're thinking about is how do we make that process of integrating into an agricultural community much less scary and much more straightforward. And that's a lot of what we offer here. We offer basically introductions, we offer access to testing, we offer access to R&D space. And so then the goal is that you can move a lot faster. When Ben and I spoke to a bunch of startups when we were planning Reservoir Farms, one of the questions we asked was, how long did it take you to get access to some acreage to test? And some people said 6 months, some people said 9 months, some people said 12, 18 months. I meet some startups today who are actually pretty far along who still do not have, they might be 2 or 3 years old and they still don't have consistent testing space. And if you're a venture capital backed startup, if you're a startup that has a burn rate, then every day that you're not testing is you're drawing down on that burn and you're spending money, but you're not testing. So we believe that a startup that's part of our ecosystem, that's part of our community, can move faster. This is a list of the kinds of facilities and capabilities we have, from farm access to recruitment. We work a lot with the local technical schools to provide access to talent. So a founder might text me and say, Danny, I need to find someone who can haul a trailer, drive a tractor, etc. We have those sorts of connections, for example. And those things are sometimes things that startups take for granted. We're beginning in Salinas, in the Salinas Valley, which is really the salad bowl of the world. It is where all the innovation really happens for leafy greens, vegetables, and strawberries in particular. You can grow lots of other things there, but that's really kind of what Salinas is thought of as for those really kind of famous high value bedded crops. And then where I am right now, actually, sitting here, is in the Central Valley. I'm in the breadbasket of California, and that is in the Central Valley, where we are planning on opening another location, and then we'll also be opening a location in wine country in Sonoma County. So between these three locations, we are covering really the vast majority of specialty crops. And a member of Reservoir Farms can actually go between different locations. So if they're working on a particular sensor or precision technology, they want to test between bedded crops and permanent crops and trees. That's something also that you can do with Reservoir Farms. Our location in Salinas is in the middle of everything. I just heard from a grower this morning on email, and she said, when I was in town from Yuma, I passed by your farm every single day. That's a great location. And sometimes I'll be out at the farm and, Ben will be in his truck driving by and we'll wave to each other because it's such like kind of a prominent location in Salinas. And that's something we love. We love that idea that growers can drop in, say hi, and meet them. And that's a big part of also kind of what we're thinking about. So you can see here that within driving distance, and in some cases walking distance of Reservoir Farms, you have some of the most famous growers in the United States and some of the most productive producers in the United States, like Duda, like TNA, and others. Our partner for Reservoir Farms is Tanner and Ansel, really a legendary vegetable and leafy green producer. We signed a lease for this land in June. We've begun work on farming. In a couple of weeks, we have our groundbreaking event, and then we'll be opening to startups in the fall. And you can see some of our partners here. That's me with Brian Ansel. And so that's our plan. So we're excited to share more details, but first I'm going to hand it off to Josh to let him introduce himself, and then we're going to hear a little bit from Ben. And Josh, so yeah, it'd be great to introduce yourself and kind of share a little bit about you and what you do, and a little bit of how you work with startups and work with the ecosystem.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate it. So Josh Ruiz, I've been in the vegetable West Coast farming operations for 20 plus years. Um, Currently at Duda as the head of ag technology, automation, innovation, and West Coast operations. Um, Ag tech is near and dear to my heart. I think, for a lot of the reasons Danny just put up there, but I farmed in Mexico before. I farmed all over the United States, still do. And there is a problem in California that if we don't figure out how to solve, we're going to be in big, big trouble. So, 10 or 15 years ago, I started diving into ag tech and innovation. And it's just something that I'm very passionate about because we have to find a better way to farm if we're going to keep farming in California. And California, as we all know, is the best place to farm for a lot of reasons. So anyways, that's a little bit about me and what I'm doing now.
Great, Josh. And so if a startup is thinking about working with Duda, what are the kinds of things you're thinking about? What are the kinds of things you're looking for them, let's say, to get smart on to really be a compelling offering for you?
Yeah, I think the key for me is just that they understand our business. Over the last, like I said, 10 or 15 years that I've been working with startups and ag tech companies in general, is they don't always understand our business. They come and try to solve problems we don't have. And so I think it's integral to understand our business and understand what's happening in the Salinas Valley or anywhere else that we're farming. And so, you know, Reservoir obviously is going to be that catalyst, I think, and that's why I think it's important that they are here on location and operating in a commercial setting like you guys are going to be doing, obviously, because you have to understand what we're going through and you have to understand our challenges and you have to understand how things work. How they work here is different than how they work somewhere else, right? And just because it works in a lab in Silicon Valley or anywhere else for that matter, doesn't mean it's going to work out in the rain and the dirt and the mud and the wind and everything else. So I think it's understand our business, understand how we operate, and try to help us solve problems that we really have.
That's great. Thank you, Josh. And so, you're someone who, I view you as really like kind of a polymath. You know a lot about a lot of things. Of course, you know a lot about wine, and you have your own actually beautiful wine room in Carmel Valley called Twisted Roots.
Thank
And
you.
but you've committed your life to agriculture, to specialty crop agriculture. Maybe you can share a little bit about what makes you go as a grower, what makes you tick.
Yeah, I just think for me, I fell in love with farming. For me, it was an honest way to make a living. I get to feed the world, and I still to this day believe that. I want to be able to produce a crop and feed people with it, and feed them healthy, nutritious, good things. And we can debate the wine thing, but I still think it's a good thing. But yeah, I like farming, and I think it is the backbone of our country and what we do, and I wouldn't change it for anything else. For me, this is what I was meant to do, and I love doing it.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for being here, and you're going to be on for questions as well, which we really appreciate. And Josh is really a part of the Salinas Valley community, and there are few growers I would say who like are as universally well respected as Josh. He's just sort of his word is bond. So thank you, Josh. Now I'll hand it over to Ben. So Ben, it'd be great for you to introduce yourself. Kind of like an ag tech native as much as anyone. Someone who's kind of synonymous with ag tech in specialty. And yeah, Ben, thanks for being here, and please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for Danny. Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having me on. Um, my background has always been on the equipment side. I fell in love with equipment, gosh, ever since I was stealing my dad's tools out and taking my toys apart. What I can always remember. Have been around the Salinas Valley and local area since I was 14 years old. I went to school at North Monterey County High School in Castroville. And what really kind of started this was my high school had a welding program and a strong industrial arts program, and I just took to it. Did all 4 years of welding, really, really loved it, and it got me into a great shop in Salinas. I worked at El Camino Machine when I was a kid, 16, 17 years old, pushing a broom, doing stuff. Really got hooked on farming and equipment and just, critical industry in general. This is the stuff we eat. This is stuff that I eat. And really, I share a lot of sentiment with Josh, but I really came into farming and to the industry through the equipment side. I was building harvesting equipment when I was 19, 20 years old. We built one of the biggest and first kind of tracked harvesters for the Scaroni family in the early 2000s. Repairing harvesting equipment, repairing tillage equipment, heavy duty equipment, tractors, and others. So my background has always been through the equipment side. I went back to school and got my engineering degree from Fresno State at the age of 31. That really kind of propelled me into this ag tech and agriculture, tech enabled agriculture equipment industry. I worked at Tanamir and Antle. We spun out Stout out of TNA, and the goal there was to build the best Rovivator. Rovivator was kind of the first technology for interplant weeding and cultivation, and how do we make that the best version? And this ties into Reservoir because when we were developing what Stout is today, I would call the planning department and say, hey, let me see your planning schedule. I want to go out and take a bunch of photos. We're developing these things called AI or machine learning models. We need a whole shit ton of pictures. So how do I do that? I would just go and grab the planning schedule and go look at stuff, and I would drive the tractor out to the Spreckles Ranch or the Sterling or wherever else. That's what's a funny part of this is where the reservoir location is today is where I was taking data images in 2018 when we were developing the models for Stout today. And moving on to different companies when I was at FarmWise, when we had to go collect data sets, it would just occurred to me, it's like, man, we were very lucky at Stout to be able to do all that sort of stuff. And then going to different companies and then moving to carbon robotics, it was the same. I just really realized that's something that our industry is missing, is the ability to do these things and do the engineering iteration cycle on a farm and do this stuff in real time is incredibly crucial. In every other industry you do, you have the ability to test in a simulated environment that is very, very close to the real environment. In ag tech, we just don't have that. So, you know, that's why I enjoy the reservoir. I think that's something we've been missing. We're heavily involved in that. And then moving on from the startup side into the Western grower side with Walt, I had done some work for Walt. Always, Walt and Dennis and Emily have always been a cornerstone of ag tech in the Salinas Valley. And Walt had said, hey, we'd love to have you on full time to do the automation stuff. And currently today, I interface with the 2,200 plus members of the Western Growers membership. And it's a really simple goal, is to help save our growers time, energy, money, and efficiency through ag tech and technology to help them with labor. And I do that in a few different ways. And I couldn't agree more with Josh's sentiment about knowing the finance and how tech companies have to understand how they do this as a business, because that is a big part of it. So
It has to pencil.
yes, has to pencil.
Has to pencil. Wonderful. So, Ben, maybe a question for you before we open up to the to our participants. If a startup comes to you, what are the two or three things maybe that you're really hoping for them to get smart on before they ask you just for those grower intros? Because that's what everyone thinks. Hey, Ben, can you introduce me to a grower? Can you introduce me to a grower? What are the two or three things that you're hoping that, what are the basics
Yeah.
that you hope that they think about before they ask for that first grower intro?
Yeah. I mean, I was on two calls yesterday where that was the third or fourth sentence from the startup company, right? It was, we're really hoping that you can introduce us to growers and we can get a partnership kicked off. The things that I try to understand uniquely about the company are where they are in their technology on their TRL scale, right? Are they close to commercialization? Have they figured out their IP? That sort of stuff. Where are they on their business side? Do they have some money they've raised? Are they looking to raise around? Are they currently raising? Those sort of things. So I start to understand that side of it, and I really dig into their tech. I'm a very detail orientated guy. I like to drill down, understand everything um, uniquely all the way. And I start to dig into this. Okay, what problem are you solving? And that's, if I have to ask that question, what problem are you solving? I really try to get them to focus on understanding that. I point them to some resources like the UC Davis cost return studies are incredible. Our own AgTech toolkit resources we have on the Western Growers website is fantastic. But I really try to understand where they are in a technology level, a business level, and where they fit into solving the biggest needs of our grower membership today.
That's great. And I think one question for you too, Ben, is like, you're someone who is in the Salinas Valley, and you also have, of course, deep connections to the Central Valley. If a startup's asking you, hey, should I'm thinking about being in the Bay Area, or I'm thinking about relocating to an agricultural region, like how do you help them think through that question?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because you have this complex problem of trying to have a place where you can have your talent. And that's what's drawing about Silicon Valley, right? Is to be able to have your top level talent and the computer vision and the computer science and, deep tech side. It's easier to maintain your staff and have your staff when you have somewhere in Silicon Valley, but then it is also hard to do all your things on day to day on the farm level if you're not in Central Valley or where you're planning on operating, right? Where your products can operate. So, it really is tough today, Danny. It's hard to say, hey, you should be located here. You need to do, I say all the time, you need to spend as much time in the field as you can to really beat the snot out of your product and iterate before it becomes a final commercialized value. But then your people need to spend the time in the farm as well. But how do you do that today? It's really just been fits and starts on trying to either A or B and B it for long periods of time for certain sprints, to get through certain things, or, hire local people that are ag related to do some certain capacities and then have them interact with your deep tech people in Silicon Valley and surrounding.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Well, I think we'll open it up to questions. If folks want to drop questions in the Q&A, they can do that. And while I wait for those, I'll just kind of keep the conversation going. So this is one for both Josh and Ben. What are some technologies, like some problems to solve that you're really thinking about right now? So if you're scanning the Ag Tech Navigator or Ag Funder or Packer headlines and you're looking for tech, what are some of the new kind of technology solutions that you're really hoping kind of hit the market for your farm?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So regenerative farming for me is real big top of mind, and so ag tech startups I'm constantly looking for are ones that can help me better understand my ground, my plants, and my watering systems. So whether that's sensors, lab technology, those kinds of things are real big for me, real top of mind for me. Of course, I love automation. I think automation's great. Again, California regulations those aren't always, go hand in hand today, but automation I think is great to some level. But and so I always tell people like I want robots out there dancing in the fields. Don't get me wrong; those are sexy. It's cool. It's going to drive funding. It's great. But at the end of the day, I contend even after 20 something years, I don't know my farm. I don't know my crop. I don't know what's going on biologically in my fields as well as I should. And so I'm constantly trying to find tech that will help me understand what's happening at a biological level.
That's great. I think we're really looking for technology now that really kind of eases the transition to regenerative. And that's it's a big topic you hear from growers. They have nothing sort of strategically against regenerative, but it's really just a question of how do they get there and what are the maybe capital tools available and technology tools. So what about you, Ben?
Yeah, the things I look for, and I generally think about the two different valleys. And yes, our membership covers more than just the two valleys, but most of the crops are grown in two valleys. We'll coordinate in those different areas. In the Central Valley, it is top of mind for me is irrigation technology currently. That seems to be one that is achievable, and there are some great companies doing some great work. And especially at the onset of Sigma coming into those growers, it's a big one. And obviously, the big one is harvest as well. Automated harvest is still nowhere to be seen in the Central Valley for a lot of the crops that need it there. You think about table grapes and citrus, stone fruits, and others. Nowhere to be seen. So, can we get to what we have been calling harvest assist, where there are some equipment that can help along the way to get to the full blown automated harvesting? And then in our valley, the Salinas Valley is, automated harvest is where we're starting to see a couple of people start to take shape here. Some really great companies, Sammy Ag Tech, Beagle Tech, and some others really starting to come into shape here. You have L5, Alex Gutierrez with strawberries. Um, Long way to go, but it's showing some very promising things. And currently, we are seeing a lot of great tech in the weeding, thinning, precision spray and application with Eco Robotics, Carbon, Stout, Vulcan acquired, and others. This is the first time I think in the past month or two I've seen companies that are leveraging different ag tech in the Salinas Valley. So using a carbon robotics machine to thin iceberg lettuce and then come back in with stout and cultivate on top of that and go zero hand labor from planting up until harvest. So some really cool stuff.
Great. We do have a couple questions from the participants. So I'll take this one from Adam from Trick Robotics, a good friend of the Reservoir. At what point should founders start asking a farmer to pay for their solution? What's the best way to have that conversation? Great one. I have a perspective, but it'd be great to hear from our growers. So, at what point should founders start asking a farmer to pay? And what's the best way to have that conversation?
Yeah, so I'll jump in because I'm passionate about this. You will rarely ever hear me say no if you present me with technology. I am open to looking at everything. I want to see everything. I tell people this all the time, startups. So I get a lot of, I'm saying that because I get a lot of people coming to me because they know I'm going to say yes and I'm going to try and I'm going to try to make it work and look at it. However, where the rubber hits the road for me is this question right here, and that is, you've raised $100 million or $50 million or whatever it is for your startup, and then you want me to pay for your R&D. And that's where it gets really hard. I'm in the middle of this conversation right now with a company that I've been doing business with them for 6 or 7 years. I think they're a good company at their core. I think they have some good technology. But every time we get to a project beyond the concept, they want me to pay for the R&D, and it gets hard for me to pay for R&D. I'm not in the R&D business. I'm in the farming business. And so I think that founders, startup tech companies need to be able to provide R&D at their expense. The grower, somebody put it to me this way this morning: the grower is betting the farm every day. And we bet the farm every single day. We don't have the opportunity or the luxury to keep betting the farm on R&D. It's not that we don't want to help you with R&D. We're willing to give in kinds. And again, the reservoir is going to give you a space to do a lot of these things so that you don't have to come to us and do your R&D with us. But I'm passionate about it. Sorry to take so long, but I think it's really, really important. When you've raised all this money, find a way to build in R&D so the grower doesn't have to take the hit, because it's hard for us to take the hit.
Yeah, I mean, just adding on, I couldn't agree more. And great question, Adam. And it really does, and the difference, I would say, knowing Adam and knowing Trick is there is a different perspective there when you're running a business model that's as a service, right? So Trick Robotics is currently running as a service, whereas some others are developing for OEM, just selling equipment. So if you want to get to that point where you could say, like, how am I actually, if my business model is to do this as a service, how do I start to, capture that revenue? I have seen in the past, especially coming from FarmWise and others, that when you really are starting to build a value, it becomes very clear from both the grower and the startup when there is a value that's being given to the grower. That's when it's time to start talking numbers, right? And the value is exactly what Josh is talking about. The value is, not doing the R&D. You've made it through those phases, right? And you've made it through that stuff. And now you're able to provide a clear value to the grower. That's when it's time to start asking.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's great. I would say one more thing, and then we'll get to the other questions. Is don't underestimate the dealer in this equation as well. I think it's something I very often hear the ag tech startup overlook, is that they realize that a lot of growers have trusted dealer relationships, whether that's RDO or Belcorp or whoever it might be. It's actually how they're buying and servicing most of their equipment is not directly. And sometimes you can get a lot of great feedback from a dealer, and they will have a lot of great information, great intelligence that you can glean. So when you go to the grower, you're actually a lot smarter. And so that's just another thought as well. And we actually have some growers like Bart Walker at Pacific Ag Rental, who's a friend of the reservoir. This is from an anonymous attendee. It is, hi everyone. Where can I find those UC Davis reports you mentioned? What content do those include? Thank you. Ben, do you want to just kind of provide a pointer to that?
Yeah, if you just go into your search engine and just do UC Davis cost return studies, that should come up. You should be able to click through. And if you get through cost of return studies, there's a couple different pages to navigate through. You're looking for like the current studies and you're going by crop, and then it'll have a crop selection that you can go through the different crops. And it's incredibly detailed. It will list every single operation and the costs included in order to do that. It'll tell you specifically harvest costs, cultivation costs, standard
Yeah,
input
yeah.
costs, all that sort of stuff.
I mean, I would say what we've found is that it's directionally accurate. Don't expect it to be perfectly precise by the grower, but it's directionally accurate. And so then when you show up to a grower referencing that information, understanding kind of their economic stack, their budget stack, that's a must So I appreciate the question. Greg Scholl is asking, as a technology solution supplier, how can we assist startups to offer products that may be applicable to the various applications? I think I understand the question. Ben, that's kind of maybe more of a then question, is
Mm.
how do you kind of link into that startup ecosystem if you want to be providing tech solutions?
Yeah, I've known Greg for a long time. Um, Thanks for coming, Greg. Um, if you're that I'm trying to really understand the question here, to provide an intelligent answer. Maybe you could rephrase it a little bit, Danny, or
Yeah,
maybe
I mean,
try not
I
to
think
give
I
any.
think it's a little bit of like, it gets this idea, Greg. I think that these startups should not be building everything themselves. And so then the question is like, how do you kind of link up with those startups? I mean, what we've seen, for example, when we have we do our monthly happy hours is we'll have 12 or 15 kind of ag tech founders go into places like Fira. Tactically speaking, I think those are great places to hold conversations, and people are very open-minded. And I think it's very reasonable to tell a startup founder, you do not need to build everything yourself and be pragmatic. An example of this is I talked to a company who was developing a weeding solution, but they'd also built their own mobility. They'd built their own wheels. And I kind of asked the question, gosh, there's a lot of solutions out there. You could have used a Burrow, you could have used an Amiga. Why are you also doing this? And like, well, we found that we felt like we needed to do it ourselves. I'm like, well, maybe not for the pre-seed build, or maybe not for the prototype. And so those sorts of things. I think that that's very reasonable. I think you can have a lot of conviction in that pitch and say, don't build it yourself, don't build it yourself. So that's kind of my quick take, but Ben, you
Yeah,
can certainly weigh
yeah.
in.
Thank you for that, Danny. Yeah, I agree. Doing the different shows that we put on, Fear is definitely one. As Western Growers is a partner in that. Be able to meet with the startups. And I would say, as an operator, when I was at Stout and others, when I was directly engineering this sort of stuff, I always leaned on third party suppliers, whether it's Hydraulic Controls Incorporated, right? And that's really like depending on whether or not my opinion is if the tech you're trying to develop is part of your core IP, then yes, you need to hunker in and figure that out and be all that sort of stuff. But if it's not part of your core IP, outsource the snot out of that, right? Whether you're using GK, Andros, or whatever, they are really good at what they do. And 90% of the time, you don't need to build that in house unless it's incredibly critical. And it's going to be cheaper to have someone do that offsite and then say, okay, we're done with that project. Thank you very much. And then move to the next one. So, I highly encourage people to outsource things.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Tim Keller from Davis. Given that something like machine harvestable tomatoes required simultaneous development of both machinery as well as new varieties, can you touch on how other life science aspects of ag tech might integrate into the farm, perhaps including varietal development, crop protection, etc.? It's a great question. I think you're seeing Bayer, for example, work with different harvesters right now on, let's say, things like lawn stem broccoli. I think it's a super exciting area, but Ben and Josh are closer to it than I am. So, I mean, Josh, do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, I think that this is a great question, Tim, and something again I'm very passionate about, and I think that a lot of growers unfortunately don't see it this way, and that's one of the struggles with ag tech, especially in California, but what I've seen across the country is I don't believe ag tech just plugs right in. There has to be changes to everything that you do. So as an example, Danny mentioned the long stem or the high rise broccoli with Bear. I was involved in that startup and creating all of that because I wanted to create an automated harvester. So I created an automated harvester only after I was had the right variety and only after I found the right farming system. Right. So I had to change completely how I farm broccoli. I was doing broccoli completely different than anybody else in California because I wanted to get to the end, which was automated harvesting. And I think that's a story that is going to be told over and over when all of this comes true in the end. A solution doesn't just plug and play. Very, very, very rarely does it plug and play. But as a grower, we have to be willing to change our farming practices, irrigation practices, fertility. One of the things in regen right now is I'm doing regen on my farm and I'm using very, very little fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer. And conceptually, that's a hard thing to get over for most growers. If I don't put nitrogen on, I won't grow a crop and then I won't have anything to harvest and then I'll lose everything. So it's just these fundamental mental blocks that they have to get through. But I do believe it's important that we're open and everybody in this, ag tech world needs to see it as an ecosystem, not just I'm plugging something into your system that currently exists. That's pretty rare.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
I
Okay.
live on twos. It's like I speak out of both sides of my mouth on this. When I talk to people providing solutions, I say you have to provide a solution that fits right into what the grower is doing today, and they should change nothing, right? I say that to the startup companies, and I really believe that's how they have to do things in order to be successful. And then when I talk to the growers, I say, hey, look, you might have to do some things in order to accommodate this, in order to make it successful. I also have a great friend of mine who works at a seed company. And we always, throw it back and forth at each other all the time. It's like, well, if you just would grow that damn iceberg lettuce 2 or 3 inches off the ground, we would have this automated harvesting thing solved, and he throws it back at me and is like, well, it's going to take 7 plus 14 years to figure out. If he could just get the equipment figured out, you guys would be in the right spot. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another way to look at it, which is sort of thinking about short, medium, long term, and then
yeah.
what kind of where on that continuum are you circling? And I think the startup has to be very mindful of the capital requirements for that long term. And let's say if it requires a farmer to make a several $100,000 kind of CapEx investment or a few $1 million CapEx investment in order to use a machine, you may be you may be a little bit too early in the market, just to kind of simplify. So that's something that we've observed as well. Okay, an anonymous attendee is asking, would the Reservoir be able to help startups assist seeking to launch proof of concepts in growing regions outside of California, for example, Peru, Mexico, New Zealand, Australia? Follow-up, the rules of the road and the problem set is often very different in each growing region. How do you guys navigate that challenge? Great question. Yes, it is very different, and we really do believe that startups should be trying to follow the crop as much as they can to get as many cycles as they can. So we have partners in these growing regions, and we're developing sort of deeper and deeper connections over time. Of course, a lot of the growers that we work with are farming in different parts of the world now, whether that's in Mexico or in South America and other places. And so we do help facilitate this for sure. And really ag is really a global industry. It's sort of cross hemispheric. So yes, it's something we're thinking about. We also are beginning to think about what does the reservoir look like outside of California, but that is a more of a 2027, 2028 thing versus a now, because now we're really focused on getting open in the West and ensuring that our growers are successful there. Question from Jeff, and this may be a good one for Josh, is given the USDA's increased investment in urban ag and California's climate resilient food system goals, how might we design a regenerative incentive model supported by storytelling and community engagement? There's a lot here, Jeff. This is meaty. That helps fund modular aquaponic systems in food deserts, tribal lands, and K-12 school districts using carbon credits, EQIP grants, or healthy soil science. Sounds like Jeff has a pretty strong thesis here, which we've got to hear more about. Maybe email
Yeah.
it to Jeff. That's meaty. But I do think that, Josh, maybe I'll kind of just simplify the question and get at one aspect of it, which is you think a lot about regenerative. You think a lot about regenerative incentives. You lived it with your own, lemon trees. Maybe you can speak a little bit about the transition and kind of what you'd like to see from the government or from incentives to kind of help ease the transition for you and for other growers.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is hot topic for me right now, Jeff. Um, I am a fully regenerative farmer, and right now I get no benefit. I get no premium. I get nothing for it. I do it purely because I believe it's the right thing for me to do for the longevity of my farm. And that's a hard thing to do. Regenerative farming for me, the first 2.5 years was really expensive because you take an ecosystem which has been managed one way, you stop and let it go back to nature, so to speak. And I'm exaggerating here a little bit, and all hell breaks loose. And so it's hard and it's expensive in the first couple of years, but it starts coming around, and then regenerative farming gets cheaper and as you go along. But my point is, I'm doing all this for me, but there is no way to tell my story. There is no retailer today who cares that I'm doing this. There's customers who care, but trying to educate customers, as I've found over the last 25 years, is very, very expensive and very, very time consuming. And it's not something that is easily done. So I think there needs to be something, but we're a long ways from that right now. Regenerative is purely going to be done because people think it's the right thing to do. And then just as a side note here, I see down here carbon credits is one of the things you have on here. So I took it upon myself to call the local university, and I'll make this a quick story, but I called them, said, "Hey, I don't care about carbon credits. I don't care about money. I just want to know, am I doing this? Am I sequestering carbon? Am I doing a good job? Am I improving my soils?" And they came out, and basically what they told me in the end was, "Yeah, we really can't even tell you that right now. We can't even measure it enough." So my point is there's still a lot of technology that needs to be developed in order for these things to become more of a story, right? We want to, it's great to talk about. I think it's headline catching, but I don't think we're there yet because it's the technology is very limiting and very expensive where it does exist, and it doesn't exist in a lot of places. So I don't know if I captured it all, but I'm with you, Jeff. I just don't know that we're there yet.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. It's fantastic. I think this is an area where tech really has to help step up, and tech has to make it cheaper for this transition. And that's it. I mean, that's something I think we think is a big part of why Reservoir Farms exists is what is the tech we need to have to have a more sustainable future of farming. And regenerative, of course, is a critical part of that.
Yep.
A question. We have two more questions, and we'll probably wrap. So, a question from Jesse Calloway. No reason to apologize, Jeff. It's a great question. So, a question from Jesse. Looking to augment maps with data, what sort of GIS solutions do farmers use most commonly? Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is a great question. I think this is something that not too many people are looking at. I'm trying to play with it right now myself. Ranch maps are such a basic tool in the world of farming that I think they get overlooked a lot. And I have a lot of great concepts, at least great in my mind, as to what we could do with these and digitize and add context and data to them. But right now, ranch maps are just paper books that people keep in their binder in their front seat of their truck. That's about all that we have at this point. One of the challenges for fresh veg and West Coast fresh veg is that our fields never stay the same. You plant a block of trees and that stays there for 30 years, doesn't move. Our fields move every 60 to 90 days. So it's a little bit more challenging, but great topic. I think something that very few people are trying to tackle.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. All right, we have an anonymous attendee. But I think it's a great question. This is a classic markets question. Once an ag tech company has a solution that adds value, do you think it is better to expand rapidly with farmers in their first market or to start expanding into new crops and regions?
Yeah, we tackled this question. Every company has to tackle this question. I think it really comes down to, the amount of money you have and what the IP or solution or platform you have looking to scale, right? If you're a weeding technology, you have to understand how big your moat is or how big the market is for what you're doing. I've seen so many slide decks on our TAM is $2 billion, $1 billion, our weeding TAM is $1 billion. And it's absolutely ridiculous. Knowing what the TAM is for what the solution you provide, knowing how much money you have, if you're providing the same technology in a different space, in a different agriculture, growing sector, region, or crop, that is 99% of the time going to take a hardware change, right? So, if you have a software stack that can move from different platforms and are just fine, that's great. But if the second you have to institute a hardware change, you're talking about another round of huge amount of development, iteration, testing, and all that sort of stuff, right? Multiple years worth of iteration to get that right. So it's really function of your core business. Are you venture backed or are you bootstrapped? Our favorite, ag tech buzzword here. And can you survive on your own by selling equipment or selling a service and doing those sort of things in a current market base? And then can you expound that into a different market space? One company that comes to mind, Mantis, has done really well over the years, using the very not so crazy techy tech to do thinning and lettuce crops, and they've done a lot of work over the years. Now they have to either come up with a different technology or move into a different space because there are other players coming in their space or being a little bit more market competitive. And that's the other side of this is market competition, right? So do you stay, if you can be the kind of sole solution in the market and make a ton of money, then that's great, right? And stay in that market. It's all a function of how much money you have versus the amount of, the opportunity that you're willing to chase versus the opportunity that's in front of you, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, that generally speaking, it's the former, not the latter. You're looking at expanding within that market versus making big pivots, big leaps to others. And what I would say is you're kind of looking for really smart and rational adjacencies. So if you're beginning to saturate that first market, then are there single turns or single pivots you can make to sort of increase that depth? I think that's ultimately going to be better for your strategy rather than sort of overextending and thinking, I'm going to do a new crop and a new market, or so that a single adjacency might be the same crop, but a new market. That's one pivot, and that might work well for you. So I would just kind of be thinking about expanding your wedge really thoughtfully, with more kind of single adjacency, sort of smaller steps. We have one last question from David Haynes, a well-known name in the ag tech world, who just says, "What about smaller farms?"
I think smaller farms are
First of
great.
all, what do you call a small farm, Josh? What do you call a small farm?
What is a small
Oh,
farm?
yeah. So I got my own personal farm. It's 100 acres. That's a small farm, in my world. And I think the question is great. I wish there was a future in America for a bunch of small farms. I just don't think it's possible. I'm a dying breed. I'm a last of my kind in the sense that I even want to go out and farm. There's not a lot who want to do that anymore and put their money on the line. And some days I'm not sure why I do, but it's in my blood. It's who I am. And yeah, I wish we could be made up of a bunch of 100-acre farms. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I call a small farm, especially in the commercial production, I call it a small farm 1,000 acres.
Yeah.
Anyone that's producing stuff for a profit, 1,000 acres is a small farm. Now, what can we do for what about smaller farms? Yeah, I mean, there's certain things. If you're talking about something that falls on a farm NG platform or something, I think if you're a smaller farm operator, you just have to get scrappy and you got to convince people to come up with solutions for your unique position.
Yeah, and the arc of time is certainly not in your favor. I mean, I think it's worth picking up Grapes of Wrath and going through some of the first few kind of paragraph or first few chapters and kind of saying, oh wow, this is a 100+ year old issue of really challenging economic conditions for small farms. So it's I think a lot of people write about this as being a very new thing. Gosh, it's recent consolidation, it's the recent entry of private equity, but it's something that's sort of as old as time. I mean, I think a big question on the small farm side is also looking at the demand side. And this is something that Josh kind of hit on a lot, which is like you're creating a small farm. Who is the buyer? Who are you really creating it for? Is it local restaurants who are willing to pay a premium because it's something that's local? I think we really have to be thinking a lot about the small farm economics, not just on the machine side, but really, are you very clear on what the output is, on who you're building for? I think that's a big question.
Yeah.
Um, well, great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for this. I will say that, of course, the goal here was to talk about Reservoir Farms and just kind of give you a flavor of the kinds of conversations that we hope to facilitate, and between ag tech startups and growers. Of course, I want to thank Josh Ruiz and Ben Pallone for their time today. These are busy folk. As I said, they each have, I think, 12 cell phones at any given moment, a stack on the table. And but so for them to take this hour and answer your questions candidly, we really appreciate it. We appreciate all our attendees, all of our questions, and Pat and Gonzalo and Grace for organizing this. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we're pretty easy to find, but contact@reservoir.co. Of course, you can reach out on LinkedIn. And yeah, have a great rest of your week, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and we'll talk very soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Danny. See ya.